All right. And I'm sorry, can you help me with the pronunciation of your middle name?
Olayiwola.
Olayiwola. Okay, so let me read the bio. So Dr. Osia Olayiwola Patrick is a member of the Harvard University Advisory Committee for the Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, a geoengineering experiment to advance understanding of stratospheric aerosols. He is also the founding director of Mastermind Network, an NGO focused on youth orientation, leadership, and sustainable business development. Dr. Patrick holds a PhD in political science with a specialization in environmental politics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, an MSc in that's Master's in Science and International Relations from University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and a BSc in International Studies from Ahmadu Bello University in Nigeria. And he's an African scholar interested in collaborative learning, transdisciplinary behavioral, and sustainability research. He has a strong interest in investigating the human and policy impact of climate change and the environment and sustainability. His research focuses centrally on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals application and implications for Africa in the areas of climate change, SDG 13, human security, water, and food, SDG, those are Sustainable Development Goals, right? 2 and 6, as well as social and environmental justice, SDG 16. So very much focused on the UN's goals, which fits really well in this class because we've talked a bunch about in different ways the UN and the IPCC and different forms of international communication around climate change. So Dr. Patrick has published several articles on these topics in reputable international journals. Yeah, so I was really happy to meet Dr. Patrick at the beginning of this semester, and glad to see that he's teaching at Mcmaster right now, and also at University of Toronto. Is that right, Dr. Patrick? So he's teaching at different classes, universities here in Southern Ontario. So we're lucky to have him, and let's thank him for taking the time to come visit our class. So awkward Zoom applause. Little clapping orange hands and stuff. Okay, yes. All right. Well, thanks so much for visiting. So did you want to say a few words to introduce your work?
Okay. Basically, once I share the slide, I will just go into it. I was just going to be looking at the discourse around climate justice, and considering the fact that this class is a media class. So we'll be linking climate justice, geoengineering, and how communication, the communication of geoengineering research as it is. So in summary, that's what I'll be discussing today. And then I'll be linking it up also to the paper I suppose you are discussing in class, which is decarbonization by Olibox. And then we'll just have some discussion around it. As much as possible, it should just be a fun 45 minutes as it is. I will try as much as possible to be straight to the point and not bore you with too much conversation around it. Like I said in my email, I can go for the next 3 hours talking about my slide.
It is an exciting topic.
Yeah. Okay. So can I share my slide now?
Yes, please go. Do I need to enable that, or is it letting you?
Okay, yeah, it's letting me do that.
Oh, good. Okay. Perfect. Very nice, looking good.
Okay. Can you see the slide?
I can.
Oh, great. Okay. I suppose we can just go into the conversation. I'm hoping as much as possible that it's going to be quite engaging. So for it to happen now, we hope that you just contribute as much as possible. I may not be seeing, I don't have a note, and I may not be seeing hands if they are raised. So there probably, if there's a raised up hand and the likes, you can just stop me at any point.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, so just to repeat that, everyone, anytime you have a question or you want to jump in with a comment, you should go ahead. Maybe if your point fits well at a certain time, then go ahead. Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much once again for inviting me to this class. I'm honored. So like I said, what I want to look at today is assessing emerging technologies in climate change mitigation and adaptation, a discourse. And the reason why it's a discourse is because I will expect that we will come up with the analysis together as a class. So what we'll be looking at today, I'll just give you a rundown of the content in itself. I'm going to be introducing climate change and just have some conversation around that. And then our first discussion is going to be to just brainstorm of what we think are the context or the rationale for decision-making within the global environment. So what do you think influence decision-making? You can start thinking around that before we come into that particular conversation. And then I will just quickly run through the theories of realism and liberalism and contextualize it in the sense that I will link it to the paper in which we are discussing, which is decarbonization by Holigin. And then we'll talk about the context of the paper, and then we'll discuss the realities of global warming, regardless of emission cuts. And then we'll discuss the geoengineering option. And there we'll have two discussions where we'll look at the implication for international politics, states, and human security. And then we'll also look at how should the media framing of geoengineering be carried out. And then we end the discussion at this point. So basically, that's what we will be discussing.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's get into it. So in the introduction, we'll talk about the whole discourse around climate change and global warming. I suppose this is not a new topic, and but as much as possible, I don't want to just take it as given. And so we are familiar with the whole concept around climate change in the sense that our world is changing and the global temperature is increasing. What we generally refer to as global warming. So there has been an increase in the temperature over time. And we said the cause of this increase in temperature that is leading to the change in our climate is as a result of human behavior, human activities within the planet in itself. And this human activity, the general argument is that there's increased human activity leading to greenhouse gas emission, which is increasing in the world. And the general progression, you probably may be familiar with this graph. This is the ICPC projections on different representative concentration pathway, assumption of what is happening in the world. The black line we see here, this one going here, is currently the trajectory in which the world is now when it comes to increase in temperature. So basically, this is our trajectory, the trajectory in which the world is going currently. And there are different proposals in which we'll get into on what we can do to ensure that we don't continue, the world does not continue, the planet does not continue to get heated and continue in this progression of the black line that we see here. And so there are different projections as relating to this, which we will get to in the course of the conversation. And then again, what we are concerned with, or better still, what we want the class to think around, is the communication of climate change itself. Should we call climate change just climate change, or should we call it climate crisis? And the media framing of it as either change or crisis changes the whole trajectory or the way we take climate change and the way policymakers also relate to the climate change, either as just change, whereby people feel, okay, it's just normal, the temperature is expected to change, or is it a crisis in the sense that the extinction of the world is imminent and the likes. So these are some of the things in which you probably want to think around in the course of the discourse on climate change. And then the media framing of climate change itself is important, right? Either as a change or as a crisis. And what we have found so far is that there are different framing as relating to the whole discourse on global warming and climate change. And as a result of that, the actors, when I talk about actors, we are talking about both states, countries of the world, and stakeholders, as it is, that are involved in the decision on climate change around the world, talking about pledges in which different actors in the sense of states, countries, companies, international, multinational corporations, and the likes, the pledges they've made to reduce the human behavior that have led to climate change. And like I said, it is the framing, the media framing of this concept, either as a crisis or an everyday event, that has determined the action and inaction of actors within the entire world on the pledges in which they have made to change the direction from, like I said, this lining we have here, the black lining, to change our direction to other concentration pathway, whereby we reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. So basically, that's the idea. So quickly, I would just want to ask, I just want to open the session for our first discussion, that within the context of climate change or with the context of general decision making in the world, what do you think is the rationale? What do you think that people look at, the actors within the international system? What do they look at in making decisions or on deciding the position in which they stand on?
Can I say them? No.
Sure.
Well, like the word actor, for example, means someone who is playing a part, and whether that part might be, like, everybody has an agenda, right? So what is the context or rationale for global decision making is, like, I guess like sometimes it comes down to individual actors. So people might, like, some countries might be saying that they want to cut emissions, but they don't actually want to. So when you're trying to make, like, the context of global decision making is that it's actors on a global scale, which means that people aren't going to be truthful or all the time. People are going to try and use climate change to get ahead, right? So that's kind of what I get from it.
Thank you very much, Max. Yes, can we have one or two more contributions as relating to that? What do you think are the rationale to decision making?
I can jump in. I think also with a lot of countries, when they think about doing like pledges for climate change, they're also thinking about how their countries can benefit from these pledges. So I think maybe economic growth plays a role in that. So the economies of countries. So they're possibly thinking about that when they're thinking about emission cuts.
Right. Yeah. So they're worried that the cuts will diminish their economic growth. Yeah. That's beautiful. Do you have maybe one more before we continue, or we'll just go ahead? Anybody? Okay, I will just go ahead for the sake of time. I want to assume that most of our contribution will also fall around that idea, to say that countries look at their interests, they look at every action in which they carry out is to better themselves, to take strategic advantage
right? Economical, political, military, and the likes. And that takes us to the discourse around realism and liberalism as a central theory in the discourse of politics in the international arena, or in the discourse of affairs. Decision making within the international arena is influenced by this central theory. So I'll just run through it. When we talk about realism itself, we said it is looking at things as they are, seeing things as they are, right? As compared to seeing things as they should be. And that's what liberalism talks about. You see a chair and you say a chair is a chair, right? It is not another thing but what it is, right? And realism, in the idea of seeing things as they are, they argued that man in itself is selfish, right? Man is competitive and will always pursue its self-interest. What that in itself implies is that when somebody says you are selfish, right, it is not an insult. Selfishness is the nature of man. You get that? And what we imply by that is that we always want to do things to our own interests. Even when you do carry out altruistic motive, right, there is always an innate side of you that wants to feel good by the action you carry. And that's the reason why you do what you do, right? In my class, when I discuss realism, I always say something. I'm just going to raise it and just leave it there for you to think about. I always talk about love, to say that love does not exist, right? Love itself is interest. It is my desire. When you look at it on that concept, when you say you love someone, or when somebody says they love you, what they imply is that they enjoy the feeling they get with you. That's what it implies, right? So it is all about self at the end of the day. And basically that's what the whole argument on realism talk about. And then he said that states are like humans. They act like, they have the same characteristics in which humans have, right? So when the actors we talk about now, both are state actors and non-state actors. That's countries of the world, international organizations, international corporations. They all act like human beings, right? They have the attributes of human beings. And they will always do what we refer to as going for actions that are selfish. They will be competitive in the action, and everything is all about interest, right? So basically that's the whole argument around realism. And I want you to hold on to this, because when we discuss decarbonization, you understand these concepts, even you relate with this argument on realism. And then the idea of liberalism is seeing things as they should be, as against what they are, an idealistic perception of the world. And there, we see things as they should be, right? Like I said, and they believe in human cooperation, right? That people must come together, we must cooperate for human good, and the like. They see the good in man, and the fact that we can come together to achieve events. This is the rationale for international organization, why people come together within the international space, right? So this is important for in our discourse of decisions in the world. And even when we discuss media framing in itself, you realize that when you write, when you watch, probably maybe you don't just think about that. When you turn on your television and you watch news, the same news broadcasted by CNN, Al Jazeera, and the Russian television, RT, right? The same information will be disseminated differently. You get that? The same acts, when CNN probably is broadcasting that particular information, you realize that they will tend to make it pro-Anglo, a pro-Western agenda. That's what they will bring out. When the Russian television is broadcasting the same information, they will silence the whole pro-Western agenda and and project a pro-Eastern agenda. The same thing also happened when Al Jazeera, for instance, talk about the same information. And all these things goes back to this idea of realism and liberalism. The need to project one's interest. And sometimes we go about this interest regardless of the advantage in which others have on it. And that's what we talk about strategic advantage when we discuss this particular concept. So now let's link it to theory and practice using the paper by Hollybock as an analysis to look at. I suppose that you must have read this paper on decarbonization as a service. We'll still come back to this when we discuss geoengineering option, but it's just to provide a context for this paper. So let me open up the floor in this at this place. What was the discourse on this paper? What did you? I suppose the whole class must have read this paper. So what's
yes, yeah, well, I think we talked a fair bit about the different schemes for reaching net zero, right? Some of the different possibilities that are out there when software companies and so on are offering decarbonization as a service. And so, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, I guess, was that she's interested in new platforms that are emerging that are trying to present themselves as you know, offering ways of mitigating climate change through software, and in different ways are creating a context for these carbon markets. And she sort of lays that out and then also questions it and asks, like, you know, wouldn't it be better if these were sort of run by the public, and so on. Yeah. So we were talking a bit about that kind of thing. Did anyone else want to bring something else up from that paper?
I can say something about this. Initially, like when I heard like decarbonization as a service, I immediately thought like as a service, okay, so you're paying for it kind of thing. So in my mind, I initially was also like, okay, so it's just kind of almost another money grab for people to try and make money off of something that's supposed to help the environment, that's supposed to be about improving our like earth and improving our world, when in reality it's just for people to make a service out of and gain money out of something that is supposed to help the environment. So
yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can we have one or two more persons on decarbonization as a service? What's you? I think the two comments sums it up, but it would be nice to hear from others what they think around that.
Yeah, and feel free to use the chat, folks, if you want to.
Hello, I just had a quick question.
John.
It doesn't deal super specifically with decarbonization, but obviously it's just about your article in general. So you often bring up like buying time so the world can transition to a lower carbon economy. I'm just curious, what do you think like that timeline would look like for societies to transition for this to actually be effective, like 10 years, 50 years?
Okay, practically now you are going to make me jump myself. But if you give me 10, maybe 2 more slides, I'm going to talk about the timing.
Okay.
Yeah, because we also read your review of solar geoengineering for the developing world, yeah, so yeah, they're Kian's so excited about it. He's just trying to get ahead to it.
Okay. Let me just rush this, and then we'll just open up the floor for those discussions. Okay, so what we have now, the context in which we produce now, right? You realize that the whole idea around decarbonization, right? Which I will come to when I raise the two geoengineering options in which you have one, which is decarbonization, right? So within the context of this paper, I still will not bore you with this. So I will still come back to this again to say that these are different pathways, right? That we come up with decarbonization, right? In the sense of decarbonization, we are looking at a situation whereby we move away from this black trajectory where the world is heating up at this level to go to probably the green or the blue, right? So that's the idea. But like you raised, when you look at the theory we just raised now, that people will always pursue their interests, right? If a particular company, like Hollybox raised in her paper, if a particular company decides that we should go on net zero, right? The whole idea around net zero itself is controversial in itself, because what you are doing is that we are saying that if you can emit, you can allow for emission, right? You can continue activities on business as usual, right? But you will you will be committed as it is to decarbonization. Having a particular device whereby probably you pay, like you have a stake in this in decarbonization. So that way, if you are producing more, or you are putting more efforts to ensure that a decarbonization effort, then we can plus minus your acts. Right? That's like a summary discourse on that. But
well, that's sorry to interrupt. I was going to add, well, one thing we also talked about was the idea that when different organizations are making these net zero pledges right now, they are in a way like committing themselves. Who knows? Like you say, it's controversial, right? Because it can be a way of avoiding getting away from fossil fuels. But when organizations commit themselves to net zero, they commit themselves to buying a lot of decarbonization in the future, right? Often, because that is seen as less difficult than actually not emitting CO2, than avoiding emissions. So they know they need emissions, but they want to decarbonize in a different way by paying for trees to be planted and things like that in other places. And that idea ends up being an interesting one, because, and this is sort of the argument that Holly Jean Buck makes in a way, right, is that in a way, like net zero sounds like just another corporate PR strategy. It's like it sounds a bit like Coke Zero for one thing, and then it's got a nice ring to it. It's a good communication strategy, and so in that sense, it's very run of the mill, right? It could just be standard greenwashing, but then on the other hand, if to really get there, like to really have that amount of carbon capture and decarbonization going on for all these organizations to really meet net zero, we would be in this kind of utopian world, right? Because there is such a long way to go. And I guess that's one of the things that has really that's interested me about that idea, is that it's such a strange mixture of I don't know, like a day-to-day economic jargon and a very speculative future. Yeah.
Okay, we have Catherine, and Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
I was just also going to mention in her article, she also talks about how companies that are doing these services, that are creating these services, they don't want to create a service that is eventually going to basically put themselves out of business. They're just gonna, like, why would you do that? Why would you invest so much money and time into a service that is going to completely get rid of like carbon emissions, and then you're all of a sudden you're like out of business? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create services and companies that are doing something for the environment that looks good, but they're like they're not putting themselves out of business essentially.
Okay, Ms. Shaman.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. So have you seen any companies at all that you would say like have sort of achieved like net zero, like that have sort of where it's not just sort of PR to get like a good eye with the media and everything. Like, have you seen, like, is there a company sort of that you would say has performed like that's at least like the closest, or one that sort of sticks out that might have come the closest to achieving that maybe?
Okay, for me personally, I've not, and that's the argument I make in most of in most of my work, to say that it's practically a media PR, and it goes back to the discourse on interest, and I was intentional about discussing realism as a theory, so that you understand the fact that every action is based on interest. So even the companies that are quote and unquote saying that proposing this idea, I in many ways will continuously encourage emission, right? And the companies that will also participate in this decarbonization services, the net zero agenda, you realize that it is more or less a way of justifying the carbon emission in which the activities are currently carrying out, right? So that way it's more of a moral, trying to just justify their own moral consciousness, quote and unquote, right? So basically that's the argument around this. But at the end of the day, you realize that you will notice that the strive towards net zero, as the paper raised, is practically impossible, because both the companies themselves as well as the practitioner, the middlemen, which is the technology in itself, the proponent of this technology, like we all have raised, will want it to continue. So in itself, emission will continue perpetually. So basically that's the whole argument around this paper, and how it links to the discourse around realism. And like I said, because of the interests of the stakeholders that are involved in this service, the supposed agenda in which we want to have, which is to ensure net zero in itself, will not be achieved at the end of the day. So basically that's that. Now, coming to the global warming realities, basically this is what we have in the world, right? Like I said, business as usual will take us around the red zones that we have in. And we are going to be talking about between 3.2 to 5.4 degree increase in global temperature if we continue business as usual, in the sense of emission continuing in this ground. And then we can also go towards other scenario, maybe the RCP 6 or that of the 4.5, whereby there's a reduction in global temperature. But when we look at this, the last one, which is the blue one here, which takes us to the pre-industrial level, whereby here we're looking at a situation whereby it is possible for us to go to this pre-industrial level when you look at climate change, right? So basically that's the idea. Now, based on this reality, the fact that we know that we cannot continue business as usual, we cannot continue business as usual because we are going to be going on this red trajectory. And on that basis is where we come up with the discourse around geoengineering options. And when we talk about geoengineering options, we'll not bore you with plenty definition, but summarily it just implies the use of it's just the large scale alternation of the climate using technologies. So basically that's a summary of what geoengineering implies. And we have two types, which is the solar radiation management and then the carbon dioxide removal. The paper you just discussed now falls around the carbon dioxide removal. And these are different options in which have been proposed for geoengineering. When we talk about solar radiation management, there you talk about the introduction of aerosol into the stratosphere in a bid to cool the planet, right? Or the use of placing large reflectors in the orbit in such a way that it reflects the sun back. That way, we are going to have a cooling of the atmosphere. And this projection under solar radiation management, the analysis there, or better still, the proposed that there is based on different eruption that has happened over time. And the feeling that it is possible for us to have this, right? And then when it comes to carbon dioxide removal, we talk about the planting of trees or a situation whereby we pump carbon dioxide into rocks and store them there, or store them in deep sea and the like. So these are different options when it comes to geoengineering, geoengineering the climate. And and the idea is to bring us to this particular blue trajectory, to say that the world is moving on this trajectory and we are still heating up, right? But we can actually move to the blue trajectory whereby we start using these geoengineering technologies to bring the world back to the pre-industrial temperature, right? Now, what do you think are the possible implication of this for the world in itself, for probably politics, state, and human security? What would be the implication of having of a reduced temperature for us to be able to reverse the global temperature that we have now? What do you think will be the implication of that?
That's a good question. I love that image too. It's a nice image showing all these different kinds of geoengineering. That's cool. Yeah, the different possibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to say that. So the question you're asking, what would the implication be of getting down to, getting to net negative emissions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we talk so much about getting there, but what would it actually mean, right? What would it look like?
Or better still, maybe I should just open up the floor for both positive and negative, whatever that comes to mind, as relates into what do you think would be the implication of geoengineering as it is. When we use large technologies, considering the fact that, or better still, I think I need to put this as a background, to say that the world itself is warming up, we are aware of that. And regardless of emission reduction, the world will still continue to warm.
Yeah.
Right? Regardless, even if we stop emission now, we are successful in stopping it as a speed, the world will still continue to warm up. And that's the argument of geoengineering scholars. And to say that for that reason, we need to start looking for out-of-the-box option to ensure that we cool down the Earth, right? And these are the different options that we have discussed, which is this diagram, the different ways in which we can cool down the Earth. When I talk about this, I always want to say this too, to say the idea of geoengineering is when you think about the positive and negative option, implication of that, imagine a situation whereby we can turn up and turn down the heat of the Earth. It's like using the AC, right? I refer to it as air condition theory, right? So imagine a situation whereby you can increase or decrease the temperature of the Earth, just the way you can increase or decrease the temperature in your room. If it's too hot, you can increase it, you can make it cold. If it's too cold, you can make it hot. So what's in your own opinion then will be the implication of that, the positive and negative implication of that?
Well, I can start us out with a couple of things that are on my mind a lot. And one is that in terms of positive implications, of having such a large scale engineering project. One would be that in a way, so much of our economic and social activities would end up having something to do with trying to sort of manage the Earth system, right? So there's a wholeness there that seems to have potential in a way. You know, this is definitely on the liberalism more than the realism side, right? This is like thinking about cooperation, but there's the potential for a lot of people to become unified around this project of kind of engineering and cooling the climate. And in a way, like where we usually think of different sectors of the economy, only certain ones have anything to do with the natural environment or conservation. In this world, almost everything would be about climate change, right? Which also interests me from a more theoretical perspective, because I tend to, like, I try to teach that way, right? Like if I'm teaching media studies, it's also about climate change. Things often seem to be going in that direction when you see the drive for decarbonization, however sort of unconvincing it still is, that there are so many organizations which have nothing to do with natural resources and managing the environment, and yet they're starting to see themselves as playing a role in the Earth system, and that interests me. But then from a more negative perspective, if you have an artificially cool planetary climate, that means there's in a way no nature left, right? For people who are attached to the idea, and I don't look at that condescendingly. I think it's an important idea, attached to the idea of wilderness spaces that are untouched by human beings, or spaces that are where nature can do its own thing, right? The plants and the animals. It might mean that there's none of that left. We have, so I could see that as a potential negative. What about other folks, and positive and negatives of geoengineering?
I guess one thing we kind of talked about earlier in class was just like if we do geoengineer our planet to make it, like if something bad were to happen, like where it suddenly was reversed, like let's say that like an asteroid hit that mirror and it accidentally reflected all of the sun, like it concentrated the sun's beams onto Earth. That probably wouldn't happen, but let's just say, like if it, I guess like the risks, the negatives are just like how risky it might be, and you never know, we might be better off just not doing that, because you never know, we might end up we might end up breaking the world in our attempts to fix it.
Wow, I like that.
Well, yeah, and there's that term as well that's out there in the geoengineering world, which is kind of a fun term because it sounds like Terminator. It sounds like some kind of science fiction movie, but termination shock, right? With the idea that, if we're geoengineering, keeping the planet cool, especially through SRM, solar radiation management, and then it suddenly stops for some reason, then would that be disastrous? The warming. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very wonderful contributions, and it speaks to the whole idea, right? And it takes us nicely to the question that who asked the question initially, has written to buying time.
Buying time, yeah, that's right. That Kian was asking about buying time.
It goes back to and that's where I want to pick it up from, to say that we are familiar with the fact, like I said, regardless of the emission reduction or termination as it is, the world will continuously continuously increase, the temperature will continuously increase. And the whole idea around this is to say that currently we have not devised a strategy, quote and unquote, on how to ensure that the planet remains safe, right? So the proponents around geoengineering argued that geoengineering itself is not a solution to climate change, because when we said if we can reduce or increase the temperature, right? There are people that argue that if you do that, what it implies is that you are telling those that are the actors, better still, that are involved in the emission, you just give them a blanket check to continuously emit greenhouse gases as it is. But the argument is to say that while we are trying to find a better solution on how to mitigate climate change and global warming, then geoengineering is an option. And the question is relating to how long, what is the time frame that we can give to ensure that we find a solution and then probably stop geoengineering itself. My response is to say that there is no dates to that. It is an unknown. We don't know how long we are going to wait to find a solution. But the thing is that pending when we find a solution, then geoengineering is an option to consider. So basically that's the argument. And I want you to just hold on to that thought, while we look at the second slide, which is the second to the last slide of the discourse. So this is the inclination when it comes to geoengineering. First, the world itself is unfamiliar with that concept, right? A general population of the world, a larger population of the world are still unaware what geoengineering itself is. I remember when I started on the discourse on climate change or climate crisis. And when we talk about geoengineering, in itself is a very complex word, it's a very controversial word, and putting that out, right? There are a whole lot of discourse relating to that, political, economical, security-wise, to say people tend to shy away from that concept in itself. And to that effect, what media framing have been trying to use now is to say, instead of saying geoengineering, we have been using more of the word climate intervention as relating to the use of geoengineering. But the first inclination is to say that the world is very unfamiliar with it. The second is the risky nature of the research in itself, and the idea that the collateral damage will be enormous. The reason why the research itself is risky is because there is still a large unknown. And the argument we make on that is to say that, in fact, we don't know what we don't know about geoengineering, right? We don't know what we don't know about geoengineering. What we don't know about geoengineering is more than what we know about it. So for that reason, there has been skepticism as relating to the actual deployment of geoengineering. So, and the idea, like we said, termination shock, for instance, if we go on the trajectory of geoengineering, or better still climate intervention as it is, and we stop at a point, we are going to return back the rate at which the world at that point, at the point whereby the engagement of geoengineering is still happening, there is going to be a cooling of the earth. But when there's a termination shock, the rate at which we move into global warming will be drastic, and which itself will become catastrophic for the world. And then also the risky nature of the research itself is to say that, like the point in which we have raised now, the negative implication of that, if you allow for geoengineering, some will benefit from it. Why some will not? There are parts of the world that will benefit from it, from the option of cooling down the earth, but there are parts of the world that will not benefit from that. So that itself is also another controversial topic, or controversial nature as relating to that topic. And then the moral hazard of geoengineering, in the sense that should we look at it from an individual action? Is it an individual responsibility, or is it a collective responsibility? And then if you have, if geoengineering will lead to the death of, say, some countries, let's say if we cool the earth, maybe it's become too cold for people to stay around say Canada, for instance, right? And then people start dying as a result of minus a large number in -0, or maybe in desert region, a temperate region, whereby you probably feel that, okay, probably if you feel that Canada is too cold and we tend to warm it up a little bit, what's the implication for people in desert region in the global south, right? Whereby increase in temperature will probably lead to deaths and the like. So basically, these are some of the moral hazards which you look at when you look at geoengineering. And then also the religious inclination that comes to that with that, which looks at geoengineering and argue on the fact that people will talk about the fact that we are trying to be God, the God factor. If you can increase and decrease the temperature of the earth, are you not taking over the God factor and the likes? So for those that are religiously inclined, they may come from this framing. So basically, these are the whole discourse around geoengineering, right? And the inclination around the controversial nature of geoengineering. So with that in mind, how then do you think that the media framing on geoengineering, how do you think that that should be carried out going forward? I'm going to open up the floor now for conversation on that. Okay, so.
Yeah, that's a good question. That there was yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up to kind of start that out as well is this notion, basically like we usually see geoengineering as something that will happen in the future, but of course there are also people who think it's already happening now in a way too, and in part the like the one source of that is the chemtrails conspiracy theories, right? And, I mean, you've probably heard of this. Let's see how like there's the group out there called Geoengineering Watch, and yeah, it's a group of people from kind of the Sierra Nevada region who believe, and this would be kind of a position that's maybe like, well, very much contrary to the scientific consensus, right? People don't, but we've been talking about academics on geoengineering, and they would probably agree that it's not happening. But it seems like part of the public perception of geoengineering is being shaped by the fact that there are a lot of folks who worry that it's already happening, that there's some kind of conspiracy behind the scenes, and the government's altering the weather. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a growing concern actually, and I share a bit of sentiment to that, to say that there's a lot we don't know, right? And in as much as for instance, the project in which I'm part of in Harvard, right? It is a project that can be carried out even without the awareness of the public, right? Right. But in as much as the institution in itself is trying to do the right thing by ensuring that they follow all the protocols and the likes, it's also possible that we have people that we just want to just pursue their interests and carry out clandestine operations and just test out how this particular instrument in itself will look like, and probably not just tell the world about it. So maybe what we'll just be seeing is that we'll be seeing the effects of those actions, but we'll just assume that they are natural, but it's also possible that they are not. So yeah, I've seen some of the conspiracy theories argument as related to that, which is quite interesting.
It is interesting, yeah. Yeah, and I wonder if, I mean, I guess that suggests that there's already a degree of fear out there that this, you know, on the one hand, geoengineering is something that a lot of people haven't heard about, but there are sort of different, somewhat fringe conspiracy theories where people have very much heard about it, and they fear that it's already happening. So that's fascinating to me, and I wonder to what extent that kind of fear will also shape the public debate around it, because I expect it'll start to become more mainstream over time, that more and more people will start to see this as a real option. And one of the interesting things, well, like you were just saying, Osea, like one of the interesting things about it, and this goes to a couple of the comments in the chat that Jasminder and Catherine made, is that, well, they're talking about the idea that it could be very costly to invest in, and it seems that so far, especially the research coming out of Harvard and David Keith's work, right? That so far what the engineers are telling us is that solar radiation management would actually be very cheap, which raises a whole other set of possibilities, right? When something's actually kind of cheap and easy to do, it starts to seem kind of inevitable. I guess it starts to seem like somebody's going to try this at some point.
Okay. Yes, you're correct on that.
Yeah.
And that's the argument. I also share that sentiment in the sense that when it comes to the cost of geoengineering itself, comparatively, I think that's the word. Comparatively, solar radiation management is a cheap option as compared to carbon dioxide removal, right? But solar radiation management itself is also expensive in itself, but comparatively it's cheaper than solar radiation management. And because it is cheaper, people tend to sway more to the option of solar radiation management in itself, right? And yes, it is like I raised earlier, it is possible that different actors probably will have been testing it one way or the other. Within the confines of their own territory, which also brings about different issues around governance, different issues around security. To say, okay, if you can say use geoengineering within the confines of your own borders, the implication of your implementation or deployment of geoengineering option, the implication will not be within your border alone, it is borderless, right? So that itself again is another issue that we tend to want to look at. But in all this, right, and that's the question which I'm throwing out to the entire class, is to say, how do we frame this to ensure that the opinion of the public, considering the fact that this is an important topic, and like you said, one way or the other, it seems we are moving towards the pathway that geoengineering will become a visible option, right? How do we frame this? How do the media, how should the media frame this for the general public, considering the fact that a large chunk of the public are unaware about geoengineering, and the people will determine the action and inaction of policymakers within their different states. So how do we frame this? I can see Bavik Shaman's hand. Is that an old hand or it's?
Yeah, go ahead, Bobby. Do you have something about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to have just bring up a comment. So we were talking about how there's conspiracies and some people believe in chemtrails that you were talking about and altering weather. Just a funny thought that UAE, in Dubai, I heard they do cloud seeding, which is just pretty much artificially making it rain because of the hot climate over there.
Right.
So it's pretty funny because in other it's definitely, I mean, there's conspiracies on its own, but it's really expensive to do, right? It's not really sustainable really, because it's just really, really costly to do. But yeah, just a thought, a comment I wanted to make there, that that I know that they do some of that as well. I was reading an article on that earlier, so yeah.
Good point. Yeah, those things are interesting. I mean, there are cases, right? And I remember hearing, I have no idea actually how true this is, but I remember hearing that didn't the Chinese government also do some cloud seeding for the Beijing Olympics? And some kind of like a weather modification work there as well. And then of course there are the more small scale examples of this, the sort that we learned a bit about reading Yuriko Furuhata's work. There's a book called Climate Media. And she's interested in the invention of artificial snow and that sort of thing, right? This is so much smaller scale, and yet it also comes to mind when you think about engineering the climate. But yeah, I'm curious. So this is a great question. How should the media framing of geoengineering be carried out, right? We've got this relatively new idea. And there has been some media framing about it, but not very much. So I'm curious what all of you communications majors think about this. Like what do you think? Like it could be anything, like be honest in your perspective about this. Maybe the media should be warning us to away from this, or maybe they should be calling people's fears. But I'm curious what you think.
Anybody with the thoughts?
We're back in the world of Zoom.
No, I'm just thinking. I guess like it's just kind of the question I feel like could be framed better in this case. I think the framing of the question isn't really very great for actually exploring the idea, because framing, like the media framing, it's hard for us in one part of the world to say how media should be framed. It's very, like, if we're talking specifically in our country, in Canada, I would say the biggest problem is people feel that they aren't really being told the truth all of the time. So I think being able to like have someone sit on the news and call out a lot of like the bullshit that people kind of get through, it would help, because just like I know that when I watch if I watch CNN or if I watch CTV News, like, and I watch their climate scientists talk, like it's owned by CTV is basically owned by the government, so they can't really go against a lot of the things that, like, they are usually pretty critical, but everybody has an agenda, right? So at least I know in Canada, a lot of the times when I'm watching like the news, I just genuinely don't feel like supported, I guess you'd say, or I guess I don't really feel like I'm being told the truth. And then if you expand it onto a global scale, I'd say like it's hard to decide what people in other countries are going to see, how their media is going to frame geoengineering as well, because some countries might not want geoengineering to go, so they're going to change their media. So I guess I kind of went in circles with this answer, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer the question, because I don't really know how the media should be framed, because yeah, I don't know. That was just my circle answer.
No, your answer, funny enough, is not circled. It's quite legit, and that's the stuff in itself, right? To say that, and that's why I introduced the idea around realism, to say that we always want to pursue our interests and the likes. But better still, when you look at it both within national and global level. For instance, I'll give you an example. In the global south, there is the idea that geoengineering itself is a conspiracy of the West to continue green gas emission unabated. So the excuse is to come up with geoengineering, and so that we'll continue on that ground, right? So that's the framing of geoengineering at that point, right? But even when you take it away from just geoengineering, you can think about any other concept. Looking at the background in itself, to say that first, people are not aware about this. right? There's a lot of controversy when it comes to the topic in itself. How should we communicate geoengineering to the people, right? So basically, that's the idea of the question in itself. Yes, Catherine?
I was just gonna mention, kind of going off what Max has already like talked about. Also, some media companies, they're kind of more like left or right wing. So depending on like where they stand, kind of like politically, they might only show kind of one side of a story rather than showing another side of a story. And so depending on who you're following and where you get your information from, the framing can be very, very different on the information that you're getting.
Well, thank you very much for that. Bhavik?
Yeah, to go off of Max and Catherine's example there. So for like what was mentioning about CTV being owned by the government and everything, there's definitely a lot of filtered stuff, right, in the media that's going to be represented in a specific way. So I guess if you look at CNN or Fox, right, like, I mean, everybody talks about the Democratic and Republican parties and which one owns which, right? So, I mean, you wouldn't really see a government type owned like CTV, for example, news media talking about like, you know, anti-vax type stuff, right? Like, I mean, it's just there's definitely filters and stuff set up with different media outlets, and they I guess they sort of have their own sort of image to sort of hold up, right? Like they're pretty much distinguished lines, I guess, that they've sort of established for themselves. And I think everybody, like, you know, with Fox, everybody considers himself as, I guess, right wing and red state type thing, right? Like it's almost as if there's like distinguished like boundaries already, and everybody sort of picked their sides type of thing, right? And then there's some that just don't want to associate themselves with any of it, right? So I mean, just as an interesting point there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just as a quick correction, it's CBC that's state owned, and
Oh, that's
CTV
right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yes, and CTV is owned by Bell.
Oh, okay. Right.
Bell Canada, so big company. I just looked that up because I was like, what? Which one is which? Yeah, it's a good point though. Like to hear from what you and Max are saying. It seems like there's this desire for, and I do think that like students, like young people now have a pretty good sense of how much bias there is in media, you know, in different ways. And so, but it's interesting to hear the desire to somehow get the raw feed, or to like get around some of that framing. It seems like there's a desire you to both have to, to get news from an unbiased source, I guess, or maybe it's more like a frustration with all the angles.
Okay, on the chat section, Jasmine wrote that I think it should show both the benefit and risks, and more so for countries that will have direct impacts. They are more vulnerable to climate change. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think Shamanta's hand is up. We can have that and then we round up then.
Yeah, go ahead, Samantha.
Yeah, I just like to add on to a little bit of what was already said too. I think I know there's like, especially in recent years, there's a lot more kind of trying to understand like the bias of different media outlets, and there's a lot more distrust in media outlets because of what agenda they may have. But I think it's also interesting, like even just the way that certain media outlets choose to word things can really influence people, because I know, as an example, like in the recent midterm elections in the US, like progressive ballot measures tend to be quite well received and very popular. But if you attach, for example, like the Democratic Party's name to it, they won't pass. So I think like the way these kind of, I guess, the way things are introduced and talked about, and what words are used to discuss them is also a really key thing, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of a priori, right? And trying to think of a good example. Like sometimes people can get used to rejecting something that comes from a particular source, and then that's all that's all they do, you know. So.
Yes, that's correct. In the sense, like you raised, the word that is used is that is used to communicate this intervention as it is very important, and that is why, like I said, there's a conscious shift from referring to this trajectory as geoengineering, and there's a consciousness to now refer to it as climate intervention, right?
Okay.
So that is to create more acceptance to the role. Climate intervention, either as carbon dioxide removal or solar radiation management, right? And then just like you raised, those that are pro geoengineering and the media outlets and media practitioners that are pro geoengineering, we definitely speak on the strengths, the benefits of having these climate interventions as it is. And then we always have the other group as it is that we also want to project the unknown and to talk about the fact that the unknown is important and the risks that comes from the unknown is also important. So like we raised, the most important is that people will stand on the space of interest, right? Whose interests are we projecting? Is it the interest of the people? Is it the interest of the states? Is it the interest of the researchers that are involved? So that determines the projection of the discourse on geoengineering. So with that, I will say thank you for the time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Patrick. Thanks so much for visiting us, and we really appreciate it. Yeah, and I did have just one final thing, which is an observation from your paper and your article about geoengineering policy in Africa, which is that, you know, it seems like there's an interesting potential framing difference between, on the one hand, seeing solar radiation management as something that will, you know, reduce the pace of global warming, or even restore the climate to a kind of pre-industrial place, and on the other hand, like you say, being a scheme that could lead to an entirely different and uncertain form of climate change. So it's almost there's that kind of distinction between going back or just kind of reducing something and creating something new. And I wonder in that way too, which of those belongs more in the media framing. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it goes back to who is doing the framing in itself, right?
Yeah.
Or the group that is doing the framing in itself. If this group are pro geoengineering, then they will want to project the positive side of geoengineering, in the sense that we are going to buy it's like I raised there, we are buying time with geoengineering. Or better still, I think I should raise this. There are three groups of thought. There are three schools of thoughts when it comes to that point. And what I've discussed so far is just two. The first school of thought is the ones that are pro, to say we know that the earth is increasing, the temperature is increasing, so for that reason, let us go the route of geoengineering, right? And then there's another school of thought that talks about the fact that we don't know much about geoengineering, and the unknown can be disastrous, right? And because we cannot turn back the hands of time, when we start geoengineering, we cannot stop, right? So for that reason, let's not even start in itself, which are the critics, the anti-geoengineering, right? And then there's another school of thoughts that is standing on the ground that, see, their geoengineering is already happening.
Right.
Either you like it or not, it is already happening. And like the examples we gave here, there have been small-scale geoengineering deployment in different parts of the world, like you said, in Saudi Arabia, in China, and even in the US and Canada and the likes, right? There are pockets geoengineering deployments, though not on large scale, that's already happening. And so this author is arguing on the fact that first we agree that the temperature is increasing. Currently what we have, and that's the argument I make in my current paper, is to say that geoengineering currently is on autopilot. There's a space of anarchy to geoengineering now. So for that reason, we must come to the table and give geoengineering a pilot, in the sense that there has to be a coordinated effort in the discourse of, in the deployment of geoengineering going forward. So basically, these are the idea in itself. And when you talk about media framing to it, this is going to be the three fundamental background that will frame the topic. Either we want to frame it on the ground that it is positive, we want to frame it on the ground that it is negative, or combine the positive and negative and say that's the reality we find ourselves. We must do something about it.
Right. Yeah, and I guess to just to add on there too, one thing I've noticed is that some people like to say, well, climate change already is geoengineering. It's just unintentional, right?
Yeah.
We're already engineering the climate by putting so much CO2 into it, but in an unintentional way. And that one might be a bit of sleight of hand too. It's not, there might be a big difference between that and the kinds of things that people are proposing to do with solar radiation management. But it's an interesting rhetorical move that's out there that I wanted to note. So anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Patrick. Thanks for coming to visit us and for all that insight. We really appreciate it. So let's take a break, everyone. Let's take a break for about the usual, about 10 minutes, and come back 4:25 and launch into presentation. So I'll see you soon.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, everyone. All right, let's go. Let's get back to it. Just as people are focusing back in on the Zoom, I wanted to bring this one quote out of After Geoengineering, out of the book, which seemed pretty relevant to Dr. Patrick's points, partly about the media framing of geoengineering, and also about and here's the quote, and also about the idea that we should look forward and imagine what the positive and negative implications would be. Sorry, I'm going to stop the recording. What the